Good afternoon and welcome on this beautiful spring day. I'm Tom Putnam, Director of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, and on behalf of Heather Campion, CEO of the Kennedy Library Foundation, and all of the sponsors who are listed in your program, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this ceremony at which we bestow the 2015 PEN Hemingway and PEN New England Awards. Let me acknowledge all those who make this event possible: the Hemingway Foundation and Society, which helps fund the PEN Award, the UCross Foundation, the University of Idaho, and especially PEN New England, including Helen Atwan, Richard Hoffman, and Karen Wolf, with whom we proudly collaborate on this and other efforts to help promote arts and literature in this community and beyond. And of course, to our distinguished judges for both awards, about whom you will hear later. And finally, to all of my colleagues here at the Kennedy Library and Kennedy Library Foundation, who do so much to make this day special, especially Susan Rinn, our Hemingway curator, and Amy McDonald, our forum producer and the current chair of PEN New England. We're honored to have members of the Hemingway family here with us this afternoon. Carol and Patrick Hemingway are dear friends and the guiding force for the Hemingway collection. We remain indebted to them for their generosity, for the care and direction they offer to support our work, and most recently for their renewed support of the PEN Hemingway program. And we're also joined by Sean Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway's grandson, who is one of the co-chairs of the Hemingway Council, which raises funds and awareness about the collection. And Patrick's daughter, Mina, and her son, Rob, are also here with us again this year. 100 years ago, Edward J. O'Brien asked the harrowing question: has the time not come at last to cease lamenting the pitiful gray shabbiness of American fiction? His query reminds me of Edith Wharton's comment when first meeting F. Scott Fitzgerald in Paris. To your generation, she quipped, I must represent the literary equivalent of tufted furniture and gas chandeliers. Edward O'Brien's response to his own question came in the form of a new anthology, The Best Short Stories of 1915, the first of what was soon to be 100 volumes published annually, the original 36 of which were edited by O'Brien himself until his death in 1941. It is my faith and hope, he wrote in the introduction to the first edition, that this annual volume of mine may do something toward disengaging the honest good from the meretricious mass of writing with which it is mingled. Over the years of his editorship, O'Brien drew attention to two generations of dazzling American authors, from Sherwood Anderson to Richard Wright, though perhaps the most significant instance of his instincts involved Ernest Hemingway. In 1923, O'Brien included Hemingway's story, My Old Man, in that year's anthology, despite the fact that it had not been published officially elsewhere. Hemingway had originally shown O'Brien his soulful tale of a boy's disillusionment with his crooked jockey father, quote, as a curiosity, as you might pick up your booted foot and make some joke about it if it had been amputated after a crash. O'Brien's reaction was quite the opposite. He found the work exceptional, enough to include among the best of the year, and he also asked permission to dedicate the 1923 anthology to Hemingway himself, who agreed, noting in his written reply, and to show you how much I appreciate it, I will make a very solemn vow never to think about any readers but you and God when writing stories all the rest of my life. Hemingway had a special knack for endearing himself to potential publishers. I should note that Katrina Kennison, the fourth editor of the Best Short Story series, in her case from 1990 to 2006, is also here with us today, and that a number of past PEN Hemingway Award winners' fiction have been featured in recent volumes, including this year's PEN Hemingway winner, whose story, The Fugue, will be in the 2015 volume. This year marks the 40th annual ceremony to bestow the PEN Hemingway Award, which can perhaps serve as a contemporary attempt to disengage the honest good from the meretricious mass of writing of today. How honored we are to be the world's repository for Hemingway's papers and to serve as the host of these annual awards, which seek to honor the best American books of first fiction published over the past year. I'm aware that this hall is full of distinguished writers and budding authors of whom I'm sure nary have ever penned a meretricious word. But we thank you all so much for coming to share in this celebration. A few years ago, we began a tradition of asking Patrick Hemingway to read an excerpt of his father's work to begin our proceedings, and let me introduce him to you now. Last spring, Poet Laureate Billy Collins graced the stage and shared an observation about poetry. A poem, he suggested, is like an eye chart. There is a big E in the beginning that pretty much everyone can see. And then the letters get smaller as you go along, and you reach in the doctor's office a point of illegibility. I don't want the poem to be incomprehensible, Collins concluded, but I want to make more demands of the reader later than earlier. I don't pretend to be a Hemingway scholar or a deep reader of literature, yet it is always a joy to discuss Hemingway's work with Patrick, though I confess some of our conversations prompt me later to scramble to the internet. Who was Metternich, and why did Patrick suggest the reference to him in A Farewell to Arms so noteworthy? Patrick connects us with Ernest Hemingway like no other, a boy who learned at the hand of his father how to enter pebble-clean rivers without spooking the cutthroat trout. For me, his keen observations about life and literature, about fiction and fishing, have made Hemingway's works both more layered and more comprehensible. The Nobel laureate was, of course, known for his tight declarative prose, perhaps in Billy Collins' analogy, akin to the large letter E on the eye chart. Critics surmise that Hemingway fashioned one of his fictional characters after Patrick, who he described in words that are as accurate as they are understandable. He is a person who is, quote, good, affectionate, and just. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to our stage Patrick Hemingway.
Well, Tom has really been very kind in his remarks, and I think we best get right on to Hemingway. I've indulged myself because I think my main impression in visiting Boston this time was to coincide with the race and seeing so many young, fit people. I thought something should be said for us old folks. And this is a description that my dad wrote when he was 28 years old, describing old age, and I think it's a remarkable achievement for someone that young. I found the Count Greffy in the billiard room. He was practicing strokes, looking very fragile under the light that came down above the billiard table. On a card table a little way beyond the light was a silver icing bucket with the necks and corks of 2 champagne bottles showing above the ice. The Count Greffy straightened up when I came towards the table and walked towards me. He put out his hand. "It is such a great pleasure that you are here. You are very kind to come to play with me. It was very nice of you to ask me. Are you quite well? They told me you were wounded on the Isonzo. I hope you are well again." "I'm very well. Have you been well?" "Oh, I'm always well, but I'm getting old. I detect signs of age now." "I can't believe it. Yes. Do you want to know one? It's easier for me to talk Italian. I discipline myself, but I find that when I'm tired, it is so much easier to talk Italian. So I know I must be getting old." We could talk Italian. I'm a little tired too. "Oh, but when you're tired, it will be easier for you to talk English." "American." "Yes, American. You will please talk American. It is a delightful language." "I hardly ever see Americans." "You must miss them. One misses one's countrymen, and especially one's countrywomen." "I know that experience. We should play, or are you too tired?" "I'm not really tired. I said that for a joke. What handicap will you give me?" "Have you been playing very much?" "None at all." "You play very well. 10 points in 100. You flatter me. 15? That would be fine, but you will beat me." Should we play for a stake? You always wish to play for a stake. I think we'd better. All right, I will give you 18 points and we will play for a franc a point. He played a lovely game of billiards, and with the handicap, I was only 4 ahead at 50. Count Greffy pushed a button on the wall to ring for the barman. "Open 1 bottle, please," he said. Then to me, "We will take a little stimulant." The wine was icy cold and very dry and good. "Should we talk Italian? Would you mind very much? It is my weakness now." We went on playing, sipping the wine between shots, speaking in Italian, but talking little, concentrated on the game. Count Greffy made his 100th point, and with the handicap, I was only at 94. He smiled and patted me on the shoulder. "Now we will drink the other bottle, and you will tell me about the war." He waited for me to sit down. "About anything else," I said. "You don't want to talk about it? Good. What have you been reading?" "Nothing," I said. "I'm afraid I'm very dull." "No, but you should read. What is there written in wartime?" "There is Le Feu by a Frenchman, Barbousse. There is Mr. Britling Sees Through It." "No, he doesn't." "What?" "He doesn't see through it." "Those books were at the hospital." "Then you've been reading?" "Yes, but nothing any good." I thought Mr. Britling a very good study of the English middle-class soul. I don't know about the soul. Poor boy. We none of us know about the soil. "Are you croyant?" "At night." Count Greffy smiled and turned the glass with his fingers. I had expected to become more devout as I grow older, but somehow I haven't, he said. "It's a great pity." "Would you like to live after death?" I asked, and instantly felt a fool to mention death, but he did not mind the word. "It would depend on life. This life is very pleasant. I would like to live forever," he smiled. "I very nearly have." We were sitting in the deep leather chairs, the champagne in the ice bucket, and our glasses on the table between us. If you ever live to be as old as I am, you will find many things strange. You never seem old. It is the body that is old. Sometimes I'm afraid I will break off a finger as one breaks off a stick of chalk, and the spirit is no older and not much wiser. You are wise. No, that is the great fallacy. The wisdom of old men. They do not grow wise, they grow careful. Perhaps that is wisdom. It's a very unattractive wisdom. What do you value most? Someone I love. With me, it's the same. This is not wisdom. Do you value life? Yes, so do I, because it's all I have. And to give birthday parties, he laughed. You are probably wiser than I am. You do not give birthday parties. We both drank the wine. What do you think of the war, really? I asked. I think it's stupid. Who will win it? Italy. Why? They are a younger nation. Do younger nations always win wars? They are apt for a time. Then what happens? They become older nations. You said you are not wise. Dear boy, that's not wisdom, that is cynicism. It sounds very wise to me. It's not particularly. I could quote you examples on the other side, but it's not bad. Have we finished the champagne? Almost. Should we drink some more? Then I must dress. Perhaps we better not now. You are sure you don't want more? Yes, he stood up. I hope you will be very fortunate and very happy and very healthy. Thank you, and I hope you will live forever. Thank you, I have. And if you ever come devout, pray for me if I am dead. I am asking several of my friends to do that. I had expected to become devout myself, but it's not come. I thought he smiled sadly, but I could not tell. He was so old and his face very wrinkled, so that the smile used so many lines that all graduations were lost. I might become very devout, I said. Anyway, I will pray for you. I had always expected to become devout. All my family died very devout, but somehow it does not come. It's too early, maybe it's too late, Perhaps I have outlived my religious feelings. My own comes only at night. Then, too, you are in love. Do not forget that that is a religious feeling. You believe so? Of course. He took a step towards the table. You were kind to play. It was a great pleasure. We will walk upstairs together.
Hello. Wasn't that wonderful? I'm Helen Atwan. I'm the director of Beacon Press here in Boston, but I have the great honor of being the administrator of the PEN Hemingway Award. So I'm very privileged to be here today with you and with Patrick to present these awards. PEN New England is a part of a global alliance of writers, editors, and readers, people very much like you all, people devoted to defending free expression, championing writing in all genres and from a very diverse community, and through awards programs like the PEN Hemingway, helping to launch the careers of some of the great writers of our time. Jhumpa Lahiri, Ha Jin, Teju Cole, Edward P. Jones, Chang Ray Lee, Jennifer Haig, Joshua Ferris, and Marilyn Robinson, to name just a few of our past winners. I'm proud to stand here next to Patrick Hemingway to announce that Patrick and Carol Hemingway have made a significant, sustained gift to allow us to increase the award this year to $20,000. And furthermore, we're increasing our judges' fee as well in recognition, and Patrick and Carol have been leaders in saying this, in recognition of the work that the judges do on behalf of the award. So I want to thank as well the Hemingway Foundation, UCross Foundation, and the University of Idaho, and all of the PEN New England members who join us in celebrating great writing. And of course, I want to thank the JFK Library for so graciously hosting these awards once again, a collaboration that has lasted for more than a decade. I'm most grateful to our judges this year, Yi-Young Lee, a past PEN Hemingway winner herself, Peter Cameron, a past Hemingway honoree, and Chris Adrian. They read over 150 books and had a very hard time getting it down to a short list, but here are their choices. Receiving honorable mention, Diane Cook for her story collection, Man v. Nature, published by HarperCollins. Unfortunately, Diane could not be with us today. Also receiving honorable mention, Mark Marciano for Marine Park, published by Penguin Press. Mark, will you come up? The finalists for the PEN Hemingway Award in 2015 were Atticus Lynch for Preparation for the Next Life, published by Triant Books. And I'm going to read you the judge's citation in one moment. There is no greater thrill or pleasure than beginning to read a book in which you feel both deeply submerged and exhilaratingly lifted up and out of your life. Atticus Lynch's first novel is such a book. The experience of reading it is shocking, exhilarating, and indelible. Oddly enough, it is everything an expected first novel isn't supposed to be. Big, ambitious, public. It looks outward rather than inward. It dispassionately examines the present rather than fetishizes the past or prognosticates the future. It is omniscient and expansive and masterfully conceived and composed. And if that weren't enough, Preparation for the Next Life is written in gorgeous, Psalter-esque prose, a threatened, disappearing language that can only be found on the pages of a book. And Atticus Lish very much regrets that he couldn't be here today. He's actually on the West Coast touring for his book. Also a finalist for the PEN Hemingway Award this year, Kim Fu, for Today I Am a Boy. And the judge's citation reads, an unflinching observer of personal history, family history, and beyond, Kim Fu writes with a pen as sharp and precise as a lancet. For Today I Am a Boy is a novel about gender, race, immigrant life, but it does not let itself be pigeonholed, just as its protagonist refuses to be defined. A fiercely beautiful novel, the book is perfect testimony to the fact that no one knows the last word about any human heart. Kim, would you come up, please? And finally, the winner of the 2015 PEN Hemingway Award is Arna Bontemps Hemenway for his book, Elegy on a Kinderklavier. In Elegy on a published by Sarah Ben Books, sorry. In Elegy on a Kinderklavier, attention is salvation. These stories are not afraid to stare in unblinking and finely grained detail at the great, sad problem of being alive. One is at first anxious when the story does not look away from the tremendous emotional, structural, and physical violence of contemporary life. Then one is thrilled, terrified, and at last comforted, since what is left when this awesome attention has dissolved, everything else is a sense of goodness in life that's hard enough to break bones. Arna, will you come up, please? And Arna will now read to us.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. You hear me all right? Yeah. You know, when they called and told me about all this, I accidentally blurted something that rhymes with moly pit. And then immediately assumed they were going to take the prize away from me, as I'd immediately prove myself unworthy. This is also wonderful. It's really been hard for me to believe. I ended up pretty convinced that I'd unknowingly made like the cleverest enemy ever in grad school, and this was like one big trick for revenge. And if that's what's actually happening now, I have to say that Patchett Hemingway impersonator is doing a pretty great job. No, thank you so much for all those kind words and for all of you being here tonight with me. I'd like to first thank everyone who made this award possible, all of the Hemingways, both the ones who are near or here, especially Patrick, Carol, Sean, Colette, Mina, and all the way down to Robbie, who I hear is a wonderful writer himself. but also the ones who are very much here in spirit, especially Ernest and, of course, Mary. Thank you also to everyone who makes all this work: Helen Atwan, Amy McDonald, Tom Putnam, Karen Wolf, Marion Kurt-Cerulli, the UCross Foundation, the University of Idaho, and many, many others who will have to forgive me for being forgetful. It's a real honor for me to have been judged by Yeon Lee, Chris Adrian, and Peter Cameron, just as an honor to be mentioned in the same breath as people like Kim Fu and Atticus Lish and Mark Giussano. Thank you to everyone at Saraband who made this a book: Kristen Radke, Kristen Miller, and Kirby Gann. And thank you especially to Sarah Gorham, the editor-in-chief, who in a coffee shop on a chilly early winter day in Iowa City sat across from a young, very nervous kid and told him to keep writing stories and to send them to her. Thank you to the Leah and Robert Hemingway Fund for Derelict Writers. Thanks, Mom. As well as my brother and sister-in-law, Zach and Megan. Thanks to all four of them for supporting me even when this writing thing didn't really seem like the best idea for the future of my finances or sanity, or for the future of theirs for that matter. But there are two people, before I read, who I'd like to honor especially here. The first is my mentor and friend, Lan Samantha Chang, who couldn't be here today. She took me in when I was an undergraduate and has worked tirelessly and selflessly in my cause for almost a decade now. I've learned so much from you about how to write and how to read, yes, but also how to live, how to be a loving, big-hearted person and friend, and how to find meaning and joy in the situations life puts you in, professional and otherwise. She's simply the best teacher and kindest, most generous of self, of time, of spirit, person I've ever known or heard of, and it is one of the great privileges of my life to stand here as your student. I hope I made you proud. Lastly, and leastly, though, comes the most important person to this book in my life. I'd like to thank the love of my life since I was 14, my wife, Marissa Hemingway. Behind every great writer, as they say, is someone integral to his work whom he somehow neglects to mention in his award speeches. I do not intend to make that mistake tonight. What can I say to you about Marissa? She's on every page of this book, in every story, in every character, behind every sentence. Possibly you can't see her there because you weren't there when 3 weeks after my daughter was born, when we were having to get up every hour and 45 minutes to feed her with a syringe, when we were basically undergoing military sleep deprivation. Marissa stood in our tiny living room and told me that she'd stay up to do the next one, that she believed in what I was doing, and that I should go ahead and go downstairs and write my story. You weren't there to experience that, but I was. And now that story, The Fugue, is here, the first one in the book. Of course, neither was anybody else there on the many, many occasions when she came home from a long day at work, only to find me leaking a strange fluid from my eyes that was definitely not tears, and told me to stand up and held me in her arms and said that I was not a failure, I was not going to fail, that I should stop pitying myself because she knew I was going to make it, that what I had to say mattered. Nobody else was there to see that, but I was. And now story after story, this book is here. I deeply wish you could have been there on these occasions, or the lifetime of other moments when, to slightly flub a Richard Wilbur line, Marissa's love called me to the things of this world. What she called me to was to believe in the complex emotional universe at work around me and in me, and so in my stories and characters. I couldn't have written about the tragedy of those who lose their lives in Iraq or in a pediatric oncology ward. I couldn't have written about the beauty and sadness and wonder of these lives if Marissa hadn't first shown me and continues to show me the joy and adventure and chance and big beating love of this one. She's my whole heart, and now that we have two beautiful children, Bluma and Maccabee, she has somehow even multiplied it until I have 3 hearts now beating out there in the world, which is somehow both terrifying and perfect. So when you think of my book, I hope you think of her too, and all the people like her who never seem to get mentioned in these types of speeches. Thank you, love, for being my inspiration and joy, my partner in adventure, for believing in me, and for doing all the things I'm aware of, as well as all the things I'm not, that helped create this book. I can't believe we really did it. I love you. Finally, I'd like to thank all of you, by which I mean everyone who reads fiction, and especially those who seek out and read and champion the work of debut authors, us nobodies who haven't had the chance to catch your eye from the cover of the New York Times Book Review or the pages of the New Yorker yet. We hope this dedication of yours will give you all the pleasures of the early adopter, that you will have the chance to have a wholly new experience in the world, but also that you can brag to your friends by casually showing off the books that you had first. In all seriousness, though, thank you, you readers, you silent majority who give yourself over and over to the page without us ever knowing. Thank you. I can still remember to this day exactly where I was standing when I read the last page of The Sun Also Rises. I can remember the way I looked up, feeling somehow like I'd been punched in the gut and the heart and the throat all at the same time. I can remember the way I went into class and then went home, and with that empathetic possibility still revealing itself in the world around me, I sat down to write. What an incredible thing this world is, that that moment has somehow led to this one. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to read just a very brief passage from the titular novella of this short story collection called Elegy on Kinderklavier. And it's going to be a little brief. I'm going to skip around a little bit. So basically what happens in the part I'm skipping in the middle is the novella is about a young married couple whose son has a terminal brain tumor. And in the middle of his sickness, the wife leaves them. And then a little later, she comes back. And so the middle part, which I'm sort of skipping, is the night of her reentrance. But hopefully this will make sense. Let me be clear about what kind of world we now find ourselves in. Heim's stretch marks have opened. Heim's stretch marks have opened, meaning that the long-term use of the steroid meant to control the swelling around the glioma in his brain has caused his skin to thin out from the inside, forming open wounds all over his stomach, back, and thighs. The steroid is also what causes him to be hungry and to have gained tremendous amounts of weight. Thus the stretch marks, thus the open wounds, which, because of his chemotherapy, refuse even the basic bodily dignity of closing. I can't say what this small detail of his medical treatment has done to him. I can't tell you what it is the first time you don't recognize your own son. Before his diagnosis, Heim was a small child, skinny but also short for his 7-year-old. For boys that age, their size balances out their novel, baffling personalities, their features starting to resolve and solidify into what you think for the first time they might look like when they're men. This reins in the slightly terrifying suspicion that they're really adults in miniature, that you failed at protecting them, at preserving that unknowing age when their love for you is still focused, can still be seeing you are convinced in everything they say or do. And so at first the sickness is an insult because of his size, because it seems impossible, no matter what the pediatric oncologists say, that a brain so small and malleable could harbor anything of real magnitude or strength, anything that could survive the vast powers that 21st century medicine might bring to bear on it, but also simply because it seems unclear exactly what a human being so physically minute might possibly do to defend himself. It's only later, in the second year of treatment, when the steroids begin to unmake Heim's body, that I begin to understand the real insult, the way in which he would be taken from me even as he lived. It is an indignity to require of yourself a certain kind of double vision in order to see your son when he's lying there in front of you, to see him with the grace required of an aging lover, to see the once body inside the thing you are presented with now, to see past and present at once, and have the latter not ruin the former. First, Heim's face billowed out, his 2 cheeks like twin sails catching a sagging wind. The rest of his body soon followed, inflating almost cartoonishly. There were the steroids, but also the fact of his decreasing mobility until he could not and still cannot move without a wheelchair. Strangely, even the size of his head seemed to change until it appeared, as it does now, vaguely monstrous, disproportionate, and swollen. The changes to his face are the most insulting fact to Heim himself. There used to be a mirror on the wall to the left of his bed, and when he had visitors, he'd stare past them as they spoke, focusing on a spot slightly above their own heads, where the specter of his ruined features stared back. But after a while, he made the nurses take it down. He's right that it is his face, or more accurately his eyes, that make the dissociation so striking and final. His bulbous cheeks and neck fat change helplessly his gaze, give it the slightly addled strabismus of the morbidly obese, and for whatever reason this is a look so antithetical to the 6-year-old waif whom I last knew without a glioma on his brainstem that the two seem most of the time irreconcilable. And then she comes in and is looking at him. It reminded me of the way she used to do more or less the same thing when he was a newborn, the way she spent hours gently feeling and moving his tiny legs and arms, which had seemed to be almost all fat and no bone then, the way he led her, looking in confusion at her hands. Now, when she got to Haim's face, she stopped. If I am to be brutally honest, I admit to taking some pleasure in her difficulty, her struggle in that moment. I wanted him to be foreign to her in the wake of her desertion, unrecognizable. For Charlie, for lack of better words, to understand that he was now more mine than hers. I also wanted her to see what was the cruelest bodily insult of all, which was that instead of the wan, ravaged, rail-thin body of the child with cancer nearing death, we had been given the opposite, a robust, bloated, outsized child, an embarrassment of flesh. I wanted her to get that we would not even have the small mercy of watching our own kid live and fade, that instead we would only have the queer neutrality of watching this other, this boy whom some persons else had allowed to grow so fat, to become so lost in his own body, of not even being able to recognize him, really. Because of course it's true that you can't see him within that body. I had to admit that, even then, watching Charlie staring down into his changed face. You can't see him as he once was. You can't see and love the passage of the years, not really, if you're being plainly honest. You see only what's before you, the foreign body, the sickness. It's impossible to see what you've already lost. Thank you.
Thank you, Arna. I am Amy McDonald, and as Tom mentioned, I'm wearing 2 hats today. I run the forums at the Kennedy Library, and I am also chair of PEN New England. People often ask me, what does PEN stand for? Poets, playwrights, essayists, novelists. PEN New England is the largest branch of PEN America, boasting one of the most concentrated communities of poets, playwrights, essayists, and novelists, many of whom are here today. How fitting that we host this ceremony at the Kennedy Library, for JFK is undoubtedly one of the most well-read presidents of the 20th century. As Jacqueline Kennedy told Arthur Schlesinger, he devoured books. He'd read, she said, and he read all the times you don't think you have time to read. He'd read walking. He'd read at the table. He'd read after dinner. He'd read in the bathtub. He'd read while doing his tie. And of course, Mrs. Kennedy was no slouch in the reading department. What other First Lady would recommend Memoirs of Duc de Saint-Simon as the best preparation for life in the White House? Our first award for PEN New England for fiction goes to Carolyn Chute. Carolyn cannot be here. The judge writes, and this I need my glasses because I don't have 40 font on this certificate. Treat us like dogs and we will become wolves. For 30 years, readers have been granted entry into Carolyn Chute's Maine, a world that bears no resemblance to the coastal vacation land where generations of presidents have perfected their golf swings. Telling the story of a rural survivalist community known as the Settlement, she brings to vivid life an America entirely missing from contemporary literature. A maximalist in the best sense of the word, Chute channels a dizzying array of voices never before heard and looks unflinchingly at complex intersections of geography, economics, culture, and class. Is the Settlement a doomsday cult, an armed militia, or something else entirely. Trenchant, resolutely human, and utterly fearless, treat us like dogs and we will become wolves, challenges us to consider the very meaning of community. The PEN New England winner for poetry goes to Wesley McNair for The Lost Child. The judge, Robin Becker, writes, in his book-length narrative, The Lost Child, Wesley McNair harnesses the timeless power of the epic poem to tell necessary stories of our human tribe. His masterful syntax dramatizes the agony and resilience of individuals under extreme duress, poverty, loss of physical and mental capacity, isolation from community. Simultaneously, McNair's lively wit and cunning humor befriend these characters connected by blood and history and dignify the particular details that shape their tales. The colloquial music in these poems will move readers to laughter and tears. Wesley. The PEN New England winner for nonfiction goes to Kevin Birmingham, who will be reading after I read his citation. For the most dangerous book, The Battle for James Joyce's Ulysses. Judge Thomas Larson writes, few can imagine the dark radiance of 20th century literature without James Joyce's Ulysses. Such is the case with Kevin Birmingham, whose magisterial story of the world's most notorious novel, once thought obscene and suppressed by a handful of American and British censors, is a treasure of literary history. His spirited analysis of this banned, exploited, befuddling, legalized, and eventually beloved work cannot be bettered. The most dangerous book, The Battle for James Joyce's Ulysses, reawakens those Victorian sensibilities that 100 years ago Ulysses assaulted and altered with anarchic delight. Birmingham must be read alongside Joyce's parable itself, its modernist rapture liberated for a new generation of readers. Kevin?
Thank you. It's a wonderful honor to receive this award, both for the award itself and for what PEN stands for, which is the battle for free expression, and that's a battle that Joyce and the people around him had undergone for over a decade in order to get Ulysses published and available to readers around the world. It's difficult to remember the fact that Ulysses was a banned book because we think of it as a boring book, as a book that's that you read in seminar rooms, and it seems like the complete opposite of a banned book. There were, thinking of Hemingway, I was thinking of Hemingway because of the event today. There were many small crises in the long battle to publish Ulysses. One of them took place near the end of 1922 when Sylvia Beach, who was the publisher of Ulysses, started to realize that her subscribers, the people who had bought the book in the United States, were not actually getting their copies because the customs officials were seizing them. And so she suddenly realized she had to get the book smuggled into the United States, and she thought, is there anyone I know who could get something smuggled into the United States? And she thought, I'll bet Ernest Hemingway would know how to get that done. And so she asked Ernest Hemingway, and Hemingway said, give me 24 hours. And he came up with a person, a man named Barnett Braverman, who smuggled the book one copy at a time. He hid it in the waistband of his pants, taking the ferry across the Detroit River from Windsor, Canada, into the United States. And so that's one little just snapshot of what Ulysses had gone through. So I'm going to read just something very brief. It's about a page. But I was trying to think, when you finish a book, you try to figure out how can you talk about what the book is about, how do you sort of sum up what the story is, and this was my way of doing it. So here it is. When you open a book, you're already at the end of a long journey. It began with an author whose first challenge was to imagine the readers who would turn the unwritten pages. The author wanted to meet the audience's expectations and draw the reader in. The book would have a voice, a perspective, and a consistent style. It would be accessible. If the book has characters, be they simple or complex, sympathetic or repugnant, the author would make them believable. They would stay in character and speak in a consistent idiom. The spoken words would be in quotation marks. The character's thoughts and the story's actions would be clearly distinguishable. And when the author began writing, the story's elements were sharpened. Clear boundaries staked out the pathways for the journey. A publisher signed a contract with the author. The publisher researched the marketplace and weighed costs and risks against potential profits and demand. The publisher knew the trade. The publisher had published books before. The book had an editor who pruned and revised, who offered perspective, and who sometimes said no. The book was probably advertised in various markets. The first copies were printed and bound months before publication day, and they were delivered without incident by the post office or private carriers. They were displayed openly in stores. Whether the book is careless or thoughtful, disposable or durable, chances are the sales will dwindle. The printers will stop printing it, and the remaining copies will be sold off at a steep discount and left to languish in used bookstores. It will not change the way books are written, nor will it change the way you see yourself or the world around you. It will be swept up by the rising tide of culture and washed away. It will probably be forgotten. If it is not forgotten, if it does change the way people see the world, reviewers and critics will be able to quote from its pages freely. Radio hosts will be able to mention the title on the air. Students will be able to check the book out of a library. Professors will be able to assign the book and deliver lectures on it without the fear of being demoted or dismissed. If you purchase the book, you will not be afraid to travel with it. No one will be arrested for printing it. No one will be monitored for distributing it. No one will go to prison for selling it. Wherever you live, your government probably protects this book against piracy. Your government has never issued a warrant for this book. Your government has never confiscated this book. Your government has never burned this book. When you open James Joyce's Ulysses, none of these things are true. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Celeste Ng, and it's my very great honor today to introduce a writer that I've long admired, Ann Patchett. When I was asked to introduce Ann Patchett, I said, yes, of course, because it's Ann Patchett. And then I sat down to actually draft these remarks, and I realized maybe I should have thought this through a little bit more, because where do you start when talking about Ann Patchett? You could start with her novels, 6 and counting, including Taft, which won the Janet Heidinger Kafka Prize in fiction, Bel Canto, which won both the Orange Prize and the PEN Faulkner Award, and her most recent, State of Wonder, which was a New York Times bestseller and one of Time Magazine's best books of the year. Or you could start with her nonfiction. There's Truth and Beauty, a tough and loving memoir of Patchett's friendship with the poet Lucy Greeley. There's her commencement address to Sarah Lawrence College, which was so well received that HarperCollins published it in book form, What Now? And in her most recent book of nonfiction, this is the story of a happy marriage, Patchett speaks with her typical wise and wry candor on everything from her writing to her husband, to her friends, to her dog. You could talk about Parnassus Books, the bookstore that Patchett founded in Nashville with her partner Karen Hayes in 2011, after learning that her hometown would no longer have a bookstore. You could talk about the fierce advocate she's been for independent bookstores everywhere. On the Colbert Report, she was so convincing on the value of independent bookstores that she's one of the few guests I've ever seen who had Stephen Colbert at a loss for words. You could list the many awards and honors Ann Patchett has received for her work. Far too many to list here because they told me that I only had 3 minutes. But she's also been awarded a Guggenheim and been named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world, just to name a couple. Or you could gush about the immense popularity of her work. Her books have been New York Times bestsellers and New York Times notable books and have been translated into more than 30 languages. Ann Patchett has even inspired a hashtag on social media, spurious Ann Patchett facts, accidentally on purpose started by her friend Elizabeth McCracken, that led to spurious Ann Patchett facts from enamored readers from across the globe. For example, did you know that anthologies used to be called anthologies because Ann Patchett invented them? That the only reason Y is sometimes a vowel is because she insisted. Or my favorite, that if you read State of Wonder 3 times in front of a mirror, Ann Patchett will appear and give you a bear hug. There are only a couple of contemporary writers who can inspire that kind of love, and Ann Patchett is one of them. But what I would like to talk about, however, is how I came to admire Ann Patchett so much that I said yes to introducing her without, as I said, really thinking it through. I first discovered Ann Patchett's work in graduate school when a professor advised me to read her debut novel, The Patron Saint of Liars. He thought that I would find a kinship with her work, and I did. But my writer crush on Ann Patchett really began when she came to the 2009 Muse and Marketplace, which is held right here in Boston. It was the first literary conference that I had ever been to, and Ann, as the keynote speaker, was to discuss her relationship to the muse, that is to inspiration, and to the marketplace, that is to the business of writing. In the lovely, gracious ballroom of the Park Plaza Hotel, Ann Patchett stepped to the podium with no notes, looked out at all of us with a gentle and lovely smile, and began, "The muse is bullshit. Get your work done." And this may actually be the best piece of writing advice that I have ever heard. It's a reminder that at the end of the day, writing is work, and it doesn't get done by magic, as everyone in this room knows. It gets done when you work on it. I've carried Ann Patchett's advice in my head with me since that conference, and some years later, when I realized that my own novel needed an omniscient narrator, her book, Bel Canto, was one of the ones that I turned to study and to figure out how you got this work done. Whether she's writing fiction or non, whether her subject is a home for unwed mothers in the 1960s, a magician's long-hidden past, or the time she shared with a brilliant, vibrant, exasperating friend, Patchett is always exploring the mysterious hidden recesses of the human heart, with lines of prose as precise as a scalpel cut. She is a champion of books, a champion of bookstores, and a champion of all that PEN stands for, the importance of literature and free expression. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ann Patchett.
Thank you. I imagine bringing you home and saying to my husband, can I keep her? She makes me feel so much better about myself. Arna, when I die, if you happen to be free, if you could do my eulogy, that would be great. I'm honored to be here, to have the opportunity to take a small part in the great happiness of this day. And I'm going to break with tradition just a little bit and address my remarks to the people that we honor here today, the writers who have won the PEN Hemingway and the PEN New England Awards. And also, the general audience is welcome to listen. That's fine. In hopes you will file the moral of this story away in the back of your minds and take it out later at some point if it's useful. This is the story of the happiest day of my life. The story starts not far from here in the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, Massachusetts, where in 1990 I had won a 7-month residential fellowship and where I wrote my first novel, The Patron Saint of Liars. When I got my acceptance letter, I was a waitress at a TGI Fridays in Nashville. I was serious about wanting to be a writer. I had been considered very promising in school, but I was also a really good waitress. And I knew that either life was a real possibility for me. As one can imagine, of a 25-year-old waitress living at home with a graduate degree in creative writing, life had not turned out exactly the way I thought it was going to. And so when I moved to Provincetown, I made a deal with myself. For 7 months, I was going to put writing first. I was going to do my absolute best work every single day and not let anything get in the way of my novel. Not love, not despair, not any of the thousands of attractive distractions life so freely offers up to us every day. And I was true to my word. While I was at the work center, I wrote the entire book, start to finish, all 400 pages in 7 months, because I knew that when it was over, I was going to have about $37 to my name, and I was going to be a waitress again. On the happiest day of my life, I was in my tiny apartment upstairs in the blue house where I lived. My downstairs neighbor, a poet, was driven mad by my work habits and would often open up the door into the stairwell that separated our apartments and scream, "Stop typing!" But I never stopped typing, not through the entire long winter. My time was almost up. And I knew I was in the general vicinity of the novel's end, but I had no idea when or how it was coming. It was mid-April in 1991, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The fellowship would be over in a couple of weeks. I was writing and writing and writing, and then suddenly I typed the last sentence. And it was as if I had been driving across country for 6.5 months, as fast as I could possibly go, and then all of a sudden I saw my house, and I hit the brakes with everything I had, and I took my hands up off the keyboard. I was 27 years old, and I had written a novel. I had known for my entire life that writing a book was the thing that I was meant for. Since earliest childhood, I'd promised myself, my parents, my friends, and anyone who would listen that I was going to write a book. And on that day, in April, even though there were revisions ahead and I still didn't have a title, I fulfilled that promise. It was a beautiful day, sunny and just spring, and I ran out into the yard and I found my best friend, Elizabeth McCracken, who also had a fellowship at the work center and who put spurious Patchett facts up on Twitter about me. She lived in the house behind mine. Elizabeth was hanging out her laundry on a clothesline between our two houses, and when I told her what I had done, she dropped her wet clothes back into the basket and she hugged me and we screamed and we ran all the way into town to drink bourbon at the Governor Bradford in the middle of the day. That was joy. And none of the real and valuable joys that came after that, selling the book to Houghton Mifflin, seeing the book in bookstores, getting a charitable review in the New York Times. None of those things came close to what I felt the day I finished writing it. I'd always said that I was going to do this really big thing, and then I did it. It wasn't until the book was out and tour was over and I'd landed a one-semester job in Murray, Kentucky, that I started to realize that there was a problem. If my life's goal was to write a book, and I had written a book, then what exactly was my life's goal? To write a second book? That seemed a little lame. The fact of the matter is I got lost after I finished my novel because I was no longer certain what the driving purpose of my life was supposed to be. If you'll forgive me for bringing up Fitzgerald at a Hemingway event, I want to read you this perfect quote that I pinched from Maureen Corrigan's book about the Great Gatsby, And So We Read On, which is a terrific book. In a letter to his daughter, Scotty, Fitzgerald writes, "What little I've accomplished has been by the most laborious and uphill work, and I wish now I had never relaxed or looked back, but said at the end of The Great Gatsby, I've found my line, and from now on this comes first. This is my immediate duty. Without this, I am nothing." After a lot of thinking, I decided that my goal in life was to have a career. This may seem ridiculously self-evident, but at the time, the gulf between one book and many books was as wide as the gulf between no books and one book. I decided that my dream would be to live a long time and to write a lot of books, some that would speak to one person and some that would speak to another, and that no one but my sister and my friend Elizabeth McCracken would ever read them all. Writing, I decided, would not be a romantic notion, but a reliable job. I liked that idea, and it's worked for me. But that thing that I managed in Provincetown, the thing that Fitzgerald tells Scotty he wishes that he had done, keeping the work first, that has been a struggle every day. I am a much better wife than I am a novelist. And you want to know why? Because it's easier to be a great wife. I am a wonderful friend, a heroic daughter. I own a bookstore in Nashville, and I do real and serious good on behalf of writers and reading and books because it's easier than writing novels. Because every day that I mean to write, I have to go in search of that part of myself that knew how to put my work first. When I see my writing self, I have to chase it down and jump on it, and it fights me, and it cuts me to shreds. In an effort to get away from me and to not put my writing first, it tells me I would be much better off giving a keynote address for an important literary award. Here's what I hope for you. I hope you keep running after that part of yourself that puts writing first. I hope you fight to hold on to it, and I hope you never entirely win. I'm pretty sure this isn't what Fitzgerald would have told you, or Hemingway. It's not what I would have told you 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I would have said, fight every day, every minute to keep writing first at all costs. But now I don't think it's as simple as that. It's the struggle between putting my writing first and living my life that keeps me a decent person. And as much as I want to be a writer, at this point, I think I'd rather be a decent person. Or probably it's more accurate to say one day I want to be one thing, and the next day I want to be the other. And some days those two goals are in direct conflict with one another, and some days they can peaceably coexist, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. Last week, my friend Elizabeth Gilbert posted a challenge on Facebook. Because I'm not actually a member of Facebook, she had to call and tell me about it. She said, that if her Facebook followers, which, as you can well imagine, are legion, would collectively contribute $10,000 to an orphanage in Nepal that she supports, she would go to a karaoke bar in New York City at midnight and sing that nearly unsingable anthem to emotional dependency, Total Eclipse of the Heart. And that embarrassing act would be filmed and posted on the internet for all eternity. By the time she put on her heels and took to the stage, she had raised over $100,000 for the Nepalese orphans just by saying she would do it. And I have never been so proud of a talented novelist for not putting her work first and for not taking herself seriously. There is, after all, a great deal of good to be done in the world. So here's what I suggest. Tie one end of a string around your work, tie the other end around your wrist, and spend the rest of your life letting out the line and then pulling yourself back. Go up as high as you can, see the world, get tangled in a few trees, and then come down with all of the knots that your effort will entail. Don't ever master it. Don't hope it will get any easier over time. Just keep trying. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ann Patchett, for putting that address before your own writing. Though those of us who are your dedicated readers look forward to you getting back to your real work. Don't worry, we won't disbar you from attending the reception in a few moments. But books are on sale in our museum store. Authors are willing to sign your copies. Let me close with some words from Edward O'Brien's introduction to the best short stories of 1915, which still ring true today. Quote, "Even if years from now, a jury of novelists and critics pronounce a very different verdict on American fiction from their verdict of today, let us be enthusiastic about life around us and the work that is being done." So I hope you can all join us in the pavilion for a reception to celebrate the life around us and to share our enthusiasm for the good work that is being done. Had we known, we would have ordered bourbon for all, but there's plenty of refreshments to be had. Thank you all so much for coming.